In 15th century Europe, a strict feudal system was established across the continent, affecting millions of peasants for centuries. This wasn't a random occurrence, but the result of a power structure, economic conditions, and social norms maintained over generations. Today, we'll analyze this system from a historical and sociological perspective to understand the harsh realities peasants faced and draw important lessons for protecting human rights in the modern world. If you're interested in learning from history to build a more just future for everyone, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Historical knowledge helps us identify and prevent similar patterns of oppression in the present. The context of 15th century peasant life. To understand why such harsh living conditions persisted among the peasantry, we need to examine the 15th century context. According to research by Dr. Barbara Hannawalt from Ohio State University, this period was characterized by three main factors. Firstly, politically. 15th century Europe was entirely based on the feudal system. Lords held absolute power over their lands, including the right to judge and make decisions concerning the lives of their peasants. Documents from England show that a lord could decide whom a peasant could marry, where they could move, and even had the right to judge minor offenses without interference from the royal courts. Secondly, socially. Society was rigidly stratified. Peasants, comprising about 90% of the population, were considered the lowest class and were not permitted to change their social status. Research by Professor Christopher Dyer on medieval English society indicates that serfs and debts were tied to the land and could not leave the manor without the lord's permission. Thirdly, economically. The economy was predominantly based on subsistence agriculture. Around 80 to 85% of agricultural produce was used to feed the peasant families, while the remainder had to be paid to the lord in the form of taxes and offerings. This left peasants living hand-to-mouth and extremely vulnerable to natural disasters. These conditions created an environment where harsh realities could develop without significant resistance from the peasants. 600,000 widespread hardship across Europe. It's important to note that the difficult living conditions of peasants were not unique to one country. During the same period, we see similar patterns elsewhere. In France, the extor corvée system obliged peasants to work for free for their lords 30 to 40 days a year. In Germany, the Schutzgrundherrschaft system created similar dependency, where peasants had to surrender a large portion of their produce to the landowner. In Eastern Europe, particularly Poland and Russia, the situation was even harsher, with serfdom lasting until the 19th century. This shows that the hardships faced by peasants were a product of the widespread feudal social structure, not an anomaly of a specific culture. Legal and religious justification. This feudal system was legitimized through both law and religion. According to documents from manorial courts in England, the rules and obligations of peasants were meticulously recorded in local legal texts. These documents regulated everything from the number of days peasants had to work for their lord to whether they were allowed to build new homes. The role of religion. In justifying this system was also crucial. The church taught that the social order was divinely ordained and each person had a predetermined place in society. Sermons often emphasized that peasants should accept their fate and work diligently as a way to serve God. This created a strong belief system that supported the maintenance of the existing social order. The mechanisms of daily life for 15th century peasants. According to research by Professor Michael Poston, published in The Medieval Economy and Society, the communal life of 15th century peasants operated under complex and often harsh mechanisms. Regarding labor organization. Historical records show a strict division of labor based on gender and age. Males aged 14 and above had to participate in strenuous tasks like plowing, harvesting, and large livestock farming. Women were responsible for poultry care, baking, weaving, and childcare. Children as young as 7 to 8 years old had to start performing age-appropriate tasks like herding chickens, collecting eggs, or helping indoors. Daily routines took place under extremely harsh conditions. Research by Dr. Judith Bennett indicates that a peasant's workday typically stretched from dawn to dusk, lasting 12 to 16 hours depending on the season. During harvest season, entire families had to work continuously for weeks to ensure crops were gathered before bad weather hit. Supervision was carried out by Binshingpeyo, peasants chosen to oversee other families in the village. Records from the British Library show that these reeves had the authority to report violations to the Lord and often received minor privileges, such as partial tax exemptions, in exchange for their cooperation. Statistical realities of peasant life. In terms of statistics, researchers estimate the living conditions of 15th century European peasants as follows. The total peasant population in Europe at this time was around 70 to 80 million people, accounting for 85 to 90% of the total population. The annual child mortality rate ranged from 30 to 40%, meaning 3 to 4 out of every 10 children born did not survive past the age of 5, the Bao average life expectancy. For peasants was only about 35 to 40 years, significantly lower than that of the nobility. Regarding living conditions, about 60% of peasant families lived in single-room homes, built of wood and clay, with dirt floors and thatched roofs. Only about 15 to 20% of peasant families could afford homes with 2 rooms or more. Marriage ages were typically very young, with men usually marrying at 20 to 25 and women at 16 to 20, and families often had 5 to 8 children, though many did not survive to adulthood. Dr. Bruce Campbell from Queen's University Belfast notes that these numbers reveal the true structural poverty and extremely high vulnerability of peasant communities at the time. Their lives were entirely dependent on weather and harvest, with very little ability to accumulate wealth or improve their circumstances. Why did such a harsh system persist? A crucial question is, why did this harsh system persist for so long without strong resistance? Regarding taught information control. Research shows that the vast majority of peasants were illiterate, with literacy rates as high as 95% in rural communities. This meant they were entirely dependent on information conveyed by clergy and local officials, who often had a vested interest in maintaining the existing order. Stories and news from the outside world rarely reached peasants, creating a closed information environment. Regarding institutional protection. Legal documents from this period indicate that lords had the right to maintain their own armed forces to protect property and maintain order. Any peasant attempting to resist or flee could be hunted down and severely punished. The legal system also clearly favored the nobility, with punishments for the same offense often varying by social status. Regarding networks of interest. According to Professor Rodney Hilton's analysis, the feudal system created benefits for various groups beyond just the lords. Urban merchants and craftsmen benefited from cheap food supplies and labor. The church received tithes and owned vast lands. Even some wealthier peasants, yeomen, could hire laborers from poorer neighbors, creating an intermediary class with an interest in maintaining the system. The impact of a harsh communal life. The impact of this harsh communal living system is documented from various angles, regarding their psychological impact. Historical psychological studies by Dr. Shulamith Shahar show that peasants often developed an attitude of accepting fate and had little desire to change their circumstances. This is evidenced by folk songs and fairy tales from the era, which often emphasized enduring hardship as a natural part of life. Social impact. Manifested in families and peasant communities developing mutual support mechanisms for survival. The system of mutual aid. Within villages where families helped each other during harvest and in times of hardship became a crucial factor for survival. However, This also created significant social pressure on those who wished to change their circumstances or violate community rules. Regarding cultural impact, anthropological research by Caroline Walker Bynum indicates that 15th century peasant culture developed with an emphasis on acceptance and adaptation. Traditional festivals, customs, and folk beliefs all revolved around finding ways to endure difficulties rather than challenging the existing order. This created a self-reinforcing cultural system where traditional values supported the maintenance of an unjust social structure. Resistance and its outcomes. Not everyone accepted this system passively. Historical records document various forms of fast. From the late 14th century, large-scale peasant revolts emerged, such as the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381, the Jacquerie Revolt in France, in 1358, and similar movements in Germany and Flanders. These revolts often involved thousands to tens of thousands of participants. The role of religious reformers was also crucial in challenging the existing system. Notably, groups like the Lollards in England and the Hussites in Bohemia issued strong criticisms of social inequality and the Church's role in justifying oppression. This is recorded in documents like William Langland's Piers Plowman and the writings of John Wycliffe. The results of these resistance efforts were mixed. Although most revolts were brutally suppressed, they forced lords to reconsider some of their harshest policies. In some areas, this led to slight improvements in living conditions and a reduction of some of the heaviest obligations, showing that pressure from below could create change, albeit limited. The decline of feudalism and its lessons. The feudal system and the hardships of peasants gradually began to change from the late 15th and early 16th centuries due to a combination of factors. The widening growth of trade and cities created new employment opportunities for peasants, allowing them to escape their ties to the land. The Black Death in the 14th century significantly reduced the population, increasing the value of labor and creating opportunities for peasants to demand better conditions. Finally, the new rise of centralized nation-states weakened the power of local lords. According to Professor Christopher Dyer, the gradual end of serfdom was not the result of a sudden revolution, but a complex process of economic and social change spanning centuries. This shows that even the most seemingly entrenched social systems can change when economic and social pressures become strong enough. Historical parallels and modern slavery. When studying the lives of 15th century peasants, we recognize similar patterns that have appeared throughout history at various times. In the 18th to 19th centuries, the serfdom system in Russia exhibited similar characteristics with even harsher levels of control and exploitation. The 19th to 20th centuries saw forms of forced labor during colonialism, where indigenous populations were compelled to work under conditions similar to medieval serfs. The 20th century witnessed the emergence of forced collective labor systems in some totalitarian regimes, demonstrating that patterns of control and exploitation can reappear in modern forms. This shows a historical tendency for a small group holding power to exploit the labor of the majority, as noted by Professor Barrington Moore Jr. in his work Social Origins of Dictatorship and Democracy. 650. Today, according to the International Labour Organization, ILO, 2022 report, forced labor and modern forms of exploitation still exist. Approximately 50 million people worldwide are in situations of modern forced labor or forced marriage, with 28 million in forced labor and 22 million in forced marriage. Modern forms of this issue include modern slavery in agriculture, child labor in factories, human trafficking for labor exploitation, and debt bondage. These forms are particularly prevalent in regions with low incomes and lax governance, such as South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and parts of Latin America. Comparing with the past, experts note that despite fundamental changes in legal and social contexts, the basic mechanisms of labor exploitation, including information isolation, creation of economic dependence, and the use or threat of violence, remain similar to those in the past. From historical lessons, international organizations have developed numerous measures to prevent and protect. Regarding the legal framework, say ILO conventions, particularly Convention number 29 on forced labor and its 2014 protocol, have been established to provide an international legal framework against all forms of forced labor. Currently, 178 countries have ratified this convention. Regarding monitoring mechanisms, and international human rights organizations conduct annual monitoring and reporting programs on the global forced labor situation. These programs include tracking global supply chains and assisting countries in developing legal systems and enforcing laws. Regarding NOSA education and awareness, community education programs on labor rights and identifying signs of forced labor have been implemented in many high-risk countries. These programs specifically focus on raising awareness in rural communities and vulnerable groups. Academic perspectives and lessons for today. In academia, the lives of 15th century peasants are viewed through various lenses. The Acte, Marxist historical school, argues that the harsh living conditions of peasants were an inevitable outcome of class struggle in feudal society based on an analysis of economic structures and production relations. They emphasize that peasant exploitation was not an anomaly, but a core characteristic of the feudal system. Conversely, the social history school refutes this view by pointing out that the relationship between lords and peasants was more complex than a simple model of class exploitation. They cite evidence from local records showing many instances where lords and peasants had mutually supportive relationships, especially during difficult times like this. Debate is important because it influences how we understand the nature of social inequality and the ways to address it. If inequality is a result of structural systems, then the solution must be structural change. If it is more complex and can be improved through reform, then different measures can be applied. Studying the lives of 15th century peasants offers important lessons for modern society. Regarding Peasant, power in the hands of a small group, especially when combined with control over information and resources, can lead to prolonged exploitation and oppression. This highlights the importance of decentralizing power and creating checks and balances in any social system. Regarding information, the historical lesson shows that information is a powerful tool for maintaining inequality. In the modern world, this translates into the importance of ensuring access to information, education, and free media for everyone. Regarding the community, history shows the crucial role of community support networks in helping vulnerable people survive hardship. However, it's also important to note that these networks can become tools for maintaining the status quo, if not combined with broader efforts for systemic change. Through examining the harsh lives of 15th century peasants, we've identified three key takeaways. First, the feudal system created structural inequality. By concentrating power and resources in the hands of a small group while limiting the freedom and opportunities of the vast majority. Second, these harsh living conditions were not natural or inevitable, but the result of political and social decisions that could be changed. Third, the human spirit of resistance and the desire for freedom always persist, even in the most extreme circumstances, and ultimately play a crucial role in driving social progress. These insights help us appreciate the advancements in human rights and living conditions that humanity has achieved, while also remaining vigilant against trends that could reverse these achievements. Historical knowledge isn't just about understanding the past. It's about building a better future. If this video helped you understand the importance of protecting human rights and social justice, please share it with others who are interested in learning from history to build a more just society. Subscribe to the channel for more meaningful historical analyses that help us better understand the path of human development. And let me know in the comments, what do you think is the most important lesson from the lives of 15th century peasants that can be applied to modern society? Thank you for taking the time to explore this important topic. Understanding the hardships people have endured in the past helps us appreciate what we have today and take responsibility for protecting human values for future generations. We'll see you in the next video, where we'll continue to explore valuable lessons from history.